The iPhone 16e is now here. This now replaces the outgoing iPhone SE3, and it is now Apple's most affordable iPhone for 2025, starting at $600, which is a pretty significant price increase over the SE3 by $170, which means that there's now only a $200 price difference between the iPhone 16e and the iPhone 16. So what sort of extras do you get if you go for the iPhone 16? Well, I'm going to be comparing everything from the design, their displays, camera, performance, battery, and features to help you guys decide. But before that, ESR actually sent us some cases and accessories that perfectly match with the new iPhone 16e. More on ESR later in the video. Okay, so let me just start off with the design, as there are quite a lot of differences here. The 16e, despite having 16 in its name, actually recycles the body of the iPhone 14. So if I compare the frames, you'll see that the 16 has a more rounded frame towards the edges, whereas the 16e is way more sharp. They both feature a frosted glass back, which I do really like, but the iPhone 16 comes in 5 colors, 3 of which are super vibrant, as opposed to just 2, black and white, on the iPhone 16e. There's also a pretty big difference when we take a look at the camera modules, with the iPhone 16e only having a single module as opposed to 2. More on their performance later. Another big difference is when we take a look at the front, where the 16e still has the old notch, whereas with a 16, we do get the dynamic island. All in all, I don't dislike the design of the 16e, but I cannot argue with the fact that a 16 just looks way more modern. Which brings me to their displays. And here, they both have a 6.1-inch panel, and like I said, the 16 comes with a dynamic island as opposed to the notch, so viewing content is just a bit more enjoyable on the 16 as you do get less distractions. Plus, I do also quite like having the dynamic island for seeing my alarms or tracking my Uber from there. Aside from this, the 16e also seems to have ever so slightly thicker bezels than the 16. But really, the biggest display difference between the two is the brightness. So on paper, the 16e can only go up to 800 nits outdoors, as opposed to 2000 nits on the iPhone 16. Now, you do need to be in a fairly bright, sunny environment for this to happen, but if you are, then the 16 will be able to boost much higher. Which brings me to the camera, where we do actually get a lot of differences. The biggest one is of course the lack of an ultra-wide module on the iPhone 16e, which I think is a really bad choice from Apple. Like, I get why they've done it, but literally any Android phone at this price range has at least 2 camera modules, if not even 3, so the fact that we only get 1 on the 16e just isn't great. And even when it comes to that single camera module, even though it is 48 megapixels in resolution, so same as the iPhone 16, it is not the same sensor as on the iPhone 16. In fact, it is a smaller sensor, although one designed for the iPhone 16e specifically, according to what Apple told me at their press briefing. Taking a look at some samples, they actually look very similar in terms of the image processing, pretty much identical. Strangely enough, once we zoom in, the 16e is the one that's sharper, although it looks to be simply an image processing choice here. Same thing in this sample, where the 16e once again seems to have more sharpness if we zoom in, although it also has more noise if you take a look at the top of the bridge. We can also see more noise in this shot right here, and on top of that, we also get less depth of field on the 16e's shot due to this being a smaller sensor. If we take a look at some night samples, the 16 is quite a bit clearer. Same thing here in this lower light shot, where the larger sensor on the iPhone 16 does make a substantial difference when it comes to the overall detail that we get. Luckily, the front-facing camera is literally the same, so no difference here at all. Now, if we take a look at the video performance, it is pretty much identical to the iPhone 16, aside from one big difference, and that is when you have a lot of motion, when you're walking or running, the iPhone 16e is going to be less stable than the iPhone 16, since its sensor is just not stabilized like the iPhone 16's is. Now, on top of not having an ultra-wide module and the main module being inferior, we do also miss out on a bunch of other camera features too. For example, there's no support for macro at all, which is something that ultra-wide module gives us. There's also no support for spatial video, something that we also do need that ultra-wide module for. And surprisingly, there's also no action mode or cinematic mode, which I'm assuming is because of only having one single module as well. And for some reason, we are also lacking the more advanced photographic styles that the iPhone 16 has, even though this seems to be a purely software feature. So while the camera's fine, for $600, Apple could have at least given it the same sensor as the iPhone 16, rather than a downgraded one. Okay, now earlier I mentioned ESR's accessories for the new iPhone 16e, and right here is ESR's rugged Halo Lock Cyber Tough case, which offers up to a 23 feet drop protection. To test it, we're going to drop it 3 times, and hopefully it doesn't break our only unit. And look at that! it survived. This is thanks to their innovative layered design, which uses a variety of materials and linings to withstand impacts. And ESR's MagSafe compatible Halo lock inside is twice as strong as their competitors, ensuring that your accessories are always secure even if I try to shake it with my full force. Then, the Halo Lock Classic Hybrid case is a bit more minimal and comes with a clear scratch-resistant backplate that exceeds military grade. And lastly, to protect your display hassle-free, simply place your phone on ESR's Ultra-Fit Armorite screen protector tray and then pull the tab. It's pretty durable too. I tried to scratch it with my keys and there wasn't even a mark. Check out ESR's iPhone 16e accessory lineup by using the links below. And this brings me to the performance. On paper, the iPhone 16e comes with the same A18 chip and 8GB of RAM as the iPhone 16. But in fact, the 16e's A18 chip comes with one less GPU core, 4 instead of 5. So if we test out the CPU performance, you'll see that in the single core, it is pretty much the same as the 16. In multi-core, the 16e surprisingly scores 100 points higher. Not really sure why this is the case. However, if we do a GPU test, you'll see that the iPhone 16 scores 16% higher thanks to that additional GPU core, so there is a pretty notable difference here. Will this impact the gaming performance? Well, it's a bit hard to say, but Apple did tell me that all major AAA titles like Assassin's Creed Mirage should still run and feel just like they do on the iPhone 16, and I can confirm that AC Mirage does indeed run very well here. But when it comes to the batteries, this is where things get really strange, because the iPhone 16e actually comes with a larger battery than the iPhone 16, which is said to be around 3,900 mAh compared to 3,500. And thanks to that, and also Apple's brand new C1 5G modem that's inside, we actually get 4 extra hours of video playback on the 16e for a total of 26 compared to 22. In fact, the 16e has a very similar battery life to the iPhone 16 Plus, despite its much smaller size. This is really impressive. Sure, the larger battery does play a part in this too, but the real difference is made by that C1 modem, which is the most efficient modem ever used in an iPhone. I don't know if you guys remember, but back in 2019, Apple bought Intel's 5G modem division for $1 billion. And 6 years later, and probably billions more in R&D costs, and we got the C1 modem, which is likely just the start of some fairly major battery life gains in future Apple products as well. And I'm really glad to see Apple include the C1 in the 16e and focus on battery life on their entry-level iPhone, something that they've literally never done before. But on the other hand, Apple decided not to give the 16e MagSafe, which is really, in my opinion, the biggest deal breaker of this phone. I mean, sure, you can buy a case with a MagSafe ring built in, like from our sponsor ESR, but wireless charging will still be locked to 7.5 watts as opposed to 15 watts on the iPhone 16. Apple's 16e cases do not feature MagSafe at all, so I think it's pretty clear to me that if you're looking for MagSafe specifically, Apple wants you to push you towards the iPhone 16 instead. And by the way, if you're wondering where both of their wallpapers are from, they're free to download from our app Wallpapers and in an 8K quality as well. So what about features? Is there anything else that the 16e misses out on? Well, surprisingly, it does have the action button, something that I was not expecting to see here. And unlike the iPhone 16, you can also configure it to trigger Apple Visual Intelligence. The 16 does this through the camera control button, which in addition to the action button, also lets you quickly launch the camera and then also adjust some camera settings by pressing it. Although personally, I actually disabled this from my iPhone 16 Pro Max as I ended up accidentally messing up some of my settings when I was just holding the phone in portrait mode. So yeah, I don't think that's a huge loss for the 16e. We also get the exact same Apple Intelligence features on the 16e as on the 16. So things such as writing tools, Genmoji, or cleanup in photos, that's all there. Although for me, the most useful Apple Intelligence feature has definitely been notification summaries, which we do get on both here. As for the speakers, here's a quick speaker test. To me, they sound the same. Now, there are also some connectivity aspects that have been downgraded on the iPhone 16e, such as only having Wi-Fi 6 as opposed to Wi-Fi 7, which I guess is fine for most people, but what I think is not fine is the fact that you're also lacking that ultra-wideband chip. So if you happen to have an AirTag, you're not going to get that accurate precision finding feature. Instead, you'll only be relying on Bluetooth, which is just not that great. So okay, having said all of this, it is pretty clear that the iPhone 16e does actually lack quite a lot compared to the iPhone 16, and honestly, I do think that the main reason why the iPhone 16e even exists is to actually push more people towards the iPhone 16. At the end of the day, I still think that getting a refurbished iPhone 15 Pro is by far the best choice, as you can get it for around $600, and with that you get a triple lens camera module, a 120Hz display that is so much brighter as well, and you still get all the Apple Intelligence features with it. So really, that is your best bet. But if you don't want to buy a refurbished iPhone, then I would still go with the 16 over the 16e, but yeah, let me know your thoughts as well. And also stay tuned for more iPhone 16e content and comparisons. I'm Daniel, ZONEofTECH, and I'll see you guys in the next one. ZONEofTECH, signing out. Cheers.